we finally found the reason why I'm having so many health issues. I am going to look at my notes because there's a lot of information here that I cannot remember. But, so, here we go. Before I share, I just want to state that everyone's chronic illness is different, their experience is different, so even if your Aunt Bertha has the same chronic illness as I do, her experience could be totally different. She could have different symptoms, different issues that she deals with. She could deal with none of it. She could deal with way more. So just because I share these things about what's going on in my life does not mean that that's everyone. I have what's called Ehlers Danlos syndrome, and I have type 3. There's several different types. It's also known as hypermobility Ehlers Danlos syndrome. So I'm just going to read the definition off to kind of help you understand what it is. So, Ehlers Danlos syndrome is a connective tissue disorder that is caused by defects in the protein called collagen, also known as soft tissue. Common symptoms include joint hypermobility, soft, smooth skin that may be slightly stretchy and easy bruising and can also cut easily, and chronic musculoskeletal pain. Because it's a progressive illness, there's not really just a pill you can take, like I had said before. There's not something you can just take. There's not just a diet. It is a progressive disease. So what we're trying to do is keep it at bay and keep it from getting worse. So that treatment is sometimes a little bit of diet. For me, there's a lot of physical therapy to try to keep those joints stable and keep them from being too loose. Try to help with the chronic joint pain. And so basically the treatment is management with PT, with some medications, with some diets, and just keeping it at bay as much as we hope we can. So just trying to help with it there. So even though the primary symptoms and the primary issues with Ehlers Danlos syndrome type 3 are the hypermobility and the bruising and all of that, there are some things that people might not understand that go with it, and then there's also associated disorders that we're not sure why. Most people with Ehlers Danlos syndrome also have these other things, but they do. So they're still researching lots, still trying to figure it out, but for whatever reason, lots of people with Ehlers Danlos syndrome have these issues as well. So a few of these associated disorders, and I'm just going to read off my list just because I'm not going to be able to remember all this information, and that's why I have it written down. But we're just going to go through these, and then at the end I'll kind of go through and say which ones I deal with and kind of how it affects my life. But to start with, there's dysautonomia, which is malfunction of the autonomic nervous system, basically the involuntary nervous system, which can cause postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, most people call it POTS, inappropriate sinus tachycardia, having trouble regulating your body temperature, and having issues just with temperature fluctuations, circulation issues, they think like hormone imbalances, but I'm not sure, trouble regulating oxygen intake, and a bunch of other stuff. So the next thing that EDS, another associated disorder, is issues with your gut. So some of these can be gastroparesis or irritable bowel syndrome or bladder control, which is a little different, but still kind of in that realm. Chronic fatigue, which we're not just talking, oh man, I'm tired, I need some coffee today. We're talking, I don't know if I can convince my body that I can get out of bed and do stuff today. That I am so tired that I don't know if I can move my legs today because it's just, I'm so exhausted. And so that's a really difficult one that a lot of people with Ehlers Danlos syndrome struggle with. I mean, you can try to manage everything else. It can be really hard if you have no energy to keep up with everything. Mast cell activation syndrome is also another disorder that is associated with Ehlers Danlos syndrome. So I'm just going to read the definition for that. So mast cell activation disorder is a malfunction of part of the immune system where a type of immune cell, mast cells, release an excess of inflammatory chemicals such as histamine, causing allergy-like symptoms throughout the body. So most things associated with mast cell activation disorder is having really bad allergic reactions. Some people have anaphylactic shock. Some people, they're just allergic to a lot of different things. And then some people don't have any of that. Some people have problems with their bones, or problems with their heart. Things you wouldn't even think would be related are related. So, but the problem a lot of people deal with is the allergic reactions because your body thinks it needs to fight something that's not there. So also another thing with Ehlers Danlos syndrome is anxiety and depression. The other thing is a lot of times people have crowding with their teeth, and they have a really high roof in their mouth. So I don't have too much crowding, but I do have a really high roof in my mouth. So it's funny, it can affect your mouth as well. Brain fog, which, you know, you're trying to keep all your systems going and your brain just doesn't always want to cooperate. So migraines, you can have immunodeficiency. So people with Ehlers Danlos syndrome can have a really hard time fighting off illness. So for me personally, I get sick a lot, unfortunately. You can have chronic pain. Is really common, and the reason for that is most people with Ehlers Danlos syndrome are dislocating and subluxing their joints all the time, daily. So people go, well, how are you walking? How are you doing anything? One, bodies are amazing and we learn how to cope with our symptoms and what's going on. And then the other thing is you're so loose already, it's not quite the same as if you were dislocating a joint and so say it was so tight like a normal person, how it's supposed to be, it's supposed to hold, and you had a really big force and it pops out. Well, it's in there strong, so it's going to be really painful, but say the joint is really loose. It's easy to sublux in there, which just means partial dislocation. And it's also really easy to slide it out. It's still very painful, not fun at all, but it's way easier when your body is so loose to dislocate. But it causes chronic pain. Your muscles are trying to hold in what your ligaments and tendons are supposed to hold in, and so your muscles tighten up and try really hard, and so that can be really fatiguing. And then it's just painful. I mean, how would it not be painful to dislocate your joints in and out? And so the other thing some people have are a mitral valve prolapse, again, something with the heart. So another thing that can happen is you can bruise easily. You can have muscle spasms because your muscles are working so hard to hold everything in. Poor healing. Another thing that happens with Ehlers Danlos syndrome is TMJ, so stuff with your jaw. Although rare, it can rupture organs because they're not strong enough. And you can also have a brain aneurysm. These are also rare, but it is possible. So that can be obviously fatal and can be scary. So you're just at more risk than the normal person, I guess you should say. You can have meningia, you can have surgical complications just because there's so many complex things with Ehlers Danlos syndrome in your body. And then you can have osteoarthritis just from, again, that wear and tear on your joints. You can have osteoporosis, which is weakening of your bones. Another one right before osteoporosis, osteopenia, so weakening of your bones but not as weak as they could be, I guess, if you want to call it that. And there's a lot more things, but these are the main things that people can deal with Ehlers Danlos syndrome type 3. So you might go, wow, that affects a lot of things. Well, it does. It affects your whole body because collagen, which is what is mutated or has an issue, which causes Ehlers Danlos syndrome, is found everywhere. I mean, your soft tissue is everywhere in your body. It's your organs, your digestive system, your joints, everything. So you can have a lot of issues. So I'm just going to go through real quick, especially to help my friends and family, just kind of how it affects me personally. So I do have dysautonomia. So I have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, inappropriate sinus tachycardia syndrome. I have trouble regulating my temperature, circulatory issues. I have hormone imbalances, and I have trouble with my oxygen. Not too much, so that's really nice. But everyone with dysautonomia doesn't mean they have POTS. They could just have temperature regulation. But so for me, I get really dizzy. I'm dizzy a lot. My heart's working really hard to try to keep that flow going. So sometimes I have to use a wheelchair when I go to stores because I'm so dizzy. I'm at a risk for falling and hurting myself. I could potentially pass out. I've only done it once, but there is always that risk. And then it's really exhausting because think about if your body was basically trying to run a marathon 24/7, it can be very difficult to have enough energy and make your heart work even harder than it already is to go walk around a store for a while. So a lot of times, yeah, I will use a wheelchair just to enjoy myself and help with those risk factors and feel better and have more energy for the rest of the day because it is exhausting. We're looking at, but we're pretty sure I have gastroparesis and irritable bowel syndrome. I also struggle with chronic fatigue. There are some days getting up is probably the hardest part for me of the day, just convincing my body I can do one more day, I can do one more thing, and telling myself I can keep going. Lately it's been a little bit better, which has been super nice. But yeah, it can be really hard. It's hard to get to work on time. It's hard to tell yourself that you can even do it because your body's so exhausted from fighting the battle the day before that it can be hard to convince yourself to fight the battle again today. So I think that goes for a lot of people with chronic illness. So we're looking into mast cell activation disorder as well. I've always had a lot of allergies. I have a ton of food allergies. But I also react pretty heavily to like perfumes or colognes. And I do struggle with mental illness. Some people know that about me and some people have no idea. It's something that I've struggled with most of my life and we have it pretty well managed. But yeah, I struggle with anxiety and I sometimes struggle with depression. It can be hard when you're battling so much every day and when so many things are limited to not feel depressed, you know, and I think that's a natural thing to happen. So I also deal with brain fog and I also deal with memory loss issues due to my catamenial epilepsy. So that can be really difficult between the brain fog and not remembering things. I've had to stop school for the time being because, I mean, if you can't remember what you learned the day before, not very easy to pass the class. So, but we're just praying that that improves and one day at a time and go back to school once we get things a little bit more stable. So, migraines, I do deal with some every now and then, not frequently, but they can be really horrible. I mean, anyone who's had a migraine knows that even a few here and there is still not enjoyable. Immunodeficiency, I mean, it's pretty easy to say that I struggle with my immune system. I mean, right now I have respiratory virus, sinus infection, I think an ear infection. That's why I sound like this. But it's hard when you're catching everything under the sun and you're already dealing with your chronic illnesses. it can be very difficult. So just try to wash my hands frequently, try to stay away from people that are sick, but you know, there's a lot of things to catch out there, so that's not always easy. I do dislocate and sublux my joints, so I've always dealt with subluxations and I think some dislocations. So so what I mean by the joints being too flexible is like I can do this with my pinky finger. I can touch, let's see if I can show you. I don't know if it's gonna go, but I can touch my thumb to my wrist over here. So everything's so loose, but probably the ones that have affected me the most are my right hip tends to sublux or dislocate, and so that can make it impossible or really difficult to walk. I've gotten pretty good at popping it back in, but still it can be really painful, and so that's another reason sometimes I'll use a wheelchair if it's a longer distance, or if I'm just having a really bad day with dislocations, subluxations. My shoulders, I think they usually sublux. Sometimes I think they dislocate, but I'm not really sure. But my shoulders are always been loose. I mean, they're always out. I've never known a time where they've actually stayed in. So yeah, my fingers, it can be really painful. Like my neck has a really hard time just staying stable enough. My knees, I tend to dislocate my knees a lot, and that's painful, but it hasn't been too bad stability wise. But yeah, so pretty much if there's a joint, I've probably subluxed or dislocated it at some point in time. Because of the joint dislocations, subluxations, and the wear and tear on my muscles and on my joints, I do tend to have a lot of chronic pain. So that was one of the things that actually made us start looking at what was going on with my body, because I was constantly in pain. Sometimes the pain would get so bad that I would start going into shock, start having a really hard time knowing what was going on around me, be able to respond to people. So yeah, it's not just like, oh, I stubbed my toe. It can be really serious. It can be really hard. So another thing is easy bruising. So, oh my goodness. Yes, I bruise very easily. I used to joke that I was a ripe banana. I used to have coworkers and parents and teachers and everyone and doctors pulling me aside and asking if everything was okay at home, and everything's fine at home. I just bruise super easily. So, I also get muscle sprains when your muscles are trying to hold super tight. Everything, it's way easier to sprain your muscles. Let's see. I do have poor healing, and I do have TMJ. My jaw always seems to hurt, but I've always had it, so, you know, I didn't really notice. I do have osteopenia, so 1 year I broke 6 bones. So these are kind of most of the things I deal with on a daily basis. Some get better, some get worse. I mean, it's always an up and down roller coaster with Ehlers Danlos syndrome. But yeah, that's kind of just what I deal with on a daily basis. Oh, and people are looking at me funny because I'm talking to myself in the car. So yeah, that's kind of EDS and how it affects me on a daily basis. And I will try to post more videos, I think, in the future, kind of about like my treatments, a little more in depth on some of the issues I deal with, and kind of what the doctors say, and a little bit of my journey. So if you have any questions or anything you'd like me to make a video on, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So, but that's pretty much it for now. But thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. It really means more than you know. Taking the time to understand EDS and what my daily struggle is a little bit more. It means a lot. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.